Just give everyone a couple more minutes to find the room. Okay, we might get started. All right, so the lecture today will be in two parts. The first one will be just an introduction to the course, letting you know how it's run, some of the expectations that I have of you, and then the second part's just an introduction to the laws. So it's very basic sort of stuff. In saying that, the second part of the lecture will be, as you'll see when we go over the assessment, second half of the lecture will definitely be assessable on the mid-semester exam in some of the parts. So you'll see today, I've put a couple of multiple choice questions for you that haven't been in there in past semesters. It's one of the changes this semester that I've made. So you'll see how that works. But when we go over the assessment, you'll be able to sort of see how the first couple of weeks are the material that will be covered on the mid-sem. So that'll be the second half of today. Okay, so course is basically me now. So it's me for both the lectures on a Monday and a Thursday. And then I take some of the tutorials also on a Monday and as a Thursday as well. And as you'll note this semester, the tutorials have been reduced in size, numbers. So previously we had about 50. This semester we have 20. And it's a whole course restructure with a 2-hour bi-weekly tutorial. So I'll tell you how that's run as we go through. That's my email, so t.thomas@law.uq.edu.au. I check it really regularly. I'm fairly prompt in my responses. You would, during the semester, you'd expect, if I'm not teaching, for me to respond straight away. So I'm very open door policy, very approachable. I have hundreds of students emailing me and coming to me during the semester, and that's my teaching style, and I hope that works for everyone. I think most people tend to find me pretty approachable. So don't be afraid to email me with any questions that you have, and come and see me and introduce yourself is a great idea. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that as we go through. On the ECP, which we'll go through in a little while, you will see under the course staff, I have my details listed there, and I also have started working on the tutors' details. So all the tutors this semester can be found there with their emails as well. And then I've started on this little graph, and the little graph is something that I introduced into the course a couple of semesters ago, and that's basically so that every day of the week there is someone from my teaching staff here on campus that you can see if you need. So I asked the tutors a couple of years ago whether they minded, it's unpaid, so whether they minded staying around on the days they teach and just being there for a consultation. As the semesters keep going, we're finding more and more students are taking advantage of that. And I think with some of the changes to the course structure and content this semester as well, that'll get even more utilised and available to students, which I think is a really good thing. There will be more names and more times this week as I talk to the tutors in preparation for the tutorials starting in week 3. So you'll see this graph with more information in it as the weeks go ahead. My office confuses students no end. Every semester I have students from this course emailing me saying, I'm wandering around campus, not able to find you, where are you? So what I've done is I've put up a little map there, which you can open into a bigger map, and you can see that everyone knows Forgan Smith Building, the big long one on the Great Court. Where the tower is, so the big tall bit in the middle with the flags on top, I'm up in that tower. So what I tend to find is I have students thinking level 4 Forgan Smith and going to the law library and the law end of Forgan Smith and going up into level 4 there and wandering around there. You will never find me there, that is not my office. So to make things easier, I have under course help actually put pictures of how to find my office. Took them on my phone and you can see how you go there. So this is the Forgan Smith Tower, these are the flags, and I'm up there on that level. So a lot of students go down this end and try to find me there, and I'm not there. If I just go back, you'll also see that's how to access it. So at the bottom level, as you enter the bottom level of Forgan Smith, you'll see that metal elevator, and you click on number 4 and you go up to number 4. I know this sounds really basic, but I probably answer 100 emails throughout the semester asking where my office is. So hopefully you all now know. And I tend to find maybe by the end of the semester 400 out of the 1,000 students that are enrolled in this course will have been to see me at some point. So 1 out of every 2 of you probably need to at some stage use that lift. Be aware that it closes at about 5, so it's actually got a locking system. I work quite late at uni. I have seen students at 8 p.m. up in my office. I have no problem with that. Some students who live on campus. As I said, I'm a very open door policy, so if I'm around and if I'm available, you can come and see me. There's no problem with that. If that's the case, you need to email me first so I can go and unlock the lift. So that's kind of how it works. Okay, so that's how to find me. We'll go through the ECP in a little bit. We've been over the course staff. We only have, I think, 4 or 5 tutors this semester. It's halved from previous semesters, so we have less teaching staff. All of the teaching staff this semester have been involved in the subject for quite some time. Many of the tutors involved longer than myself. I've been in Laws 1100 I started out as a tutor probably about 6 years ago, and then 3 years ago there was a job to lecture as well. Applied for that job and got it. And then about 2 years ago I became course coordinator, so that's kind of how it's progressed. Lots and lots of changes to this course. If you've read through the assessment, you'll see all the scaffolded assessment. When this course was run 6 years ago, it was a 30% mid-sem and a 70% final. And there was nothing else. And now it's very much incremental, and you'll see how that works. And I think the results in the course and students really liking law by the end of it. I know there would be a lot of you sitting in the seats today pretty sceptical about law and why you have to study it. But generally the feedback at the end is, I like this course one of the most in my university degree. So hopefully I can give that to you guys as well and continue on that trend. It's a general course. If you put in work, you will do well. And you'll see that with some of the stats I've put in this semester from previous semesters. It covers a broad range of topics, gives you a broad range of understanding of the law. We deal with basic Australian system at the start, so this week and next week, and then we go on to tort law, contract law, consumer law, very generally. It's not a difficult course, I don't think. And the assessment structure now and the way the tutorials are and the way the lectures are very much, I think, prepares you for the final exam, which is only 45% now. But the number of students deferring and supplementary exams in that final period is very few now. I think last semester maybe 29 out of 1,100 students actually sat a supplementary or deferred exam. And some of those were, of course, genuinely sick. So I think that shows students are pretty comfortable going into it. If you put in a little bit of effort each week, I don't ask for a whole heap, but if you just consistently put in effort, and I'll tell you how to do that in the first half of this lecture, by the time you sit the final exam, you will be very comfortable. And there's no tricks. I don't trick you on exams. The content I have taught you, and especially with the final exam, you will be guided onto what's on the final exam. And the quality of work over the last few semesters has been unbelievable. The semester one this year, people who have marked the papers for the last 6-7 years said the quality was as good as what they would expect in a law subject for students in 3rd or 4th year. And I thought that was pretty remarkable. And I got that from practicing lawyers who do it as a profession. So it was, you know, give a lot to this subject and you will get rewards and you'll get back what you put into it. You gain an understanding of the Australian legal system, particularly in relation to Australian business law. I try to make it as topical as I possibly can. So we look at a lot of cases, and I have a lot of students coming to me saying throughout the semester, I wish I'd known that 2 years ago when it happened to me. And that's what I try to give you. I try to give you an understanding of things that, even if you don't go down a legal path, regardless of what you're going to do, whether it's an accountant, a business owner, something in commerce, something in tourism, what you learn each week is something that hopefully will be really beneficial to you at some point during your career and during your life. And it doesn't even have to be from a work experience, it can just be from a personal experience. And I think that's what this course gives you. It's a broad range of subjects, as I said, and it covers many different areas, as you'll see. And we don't go into anything too specifically, but it's just that general sort of overview of everything. Course textbook. Next year, what I'd say to you guys is just know this. Second semester next year, we go to a new edition. So we've had the course textbook now for 2 or 3 years. The next edition, which is the 5th edition, I've updated with Nick. So it's first time I've had input into it. And that means that it will then be out of date. So there will be a lot of second-hand copies circulating around. I do advise students, as I've said here, to get the course textbook. It'll help with your assignment, it'll help with your final exam, and it'll help particularly with your summary notes. And some of you won't know what this is yet, you might have heard it from friends, but this is an example of it, and I talk about it a little bit later in the first half of this lecture. But the course textbook's really helpful. It's a great textbook, and it's why I was involved in the 5th edition, because it's so simple to understand. There are so many business law textbooks out there where I find it hard getting through the content, and it's very boring, and it's hard to plough through. This is really well written, simple language, explains cases very well, and everything's outlined really easily. So it will help you a lot, and it'll particularly help you with your mid-semester exam. There will be nothing in the mid-semester exam that isn't in the first 4 chapters of this book. So that's what I'll say to you, and we'll talk about the mid-sem soon. But the mid-semester exam, all questions will come from here. The content I deliver in the lecture as well, yes, but all the content on the lecture is replicated in this textbook. So it's very, very useful for the mid-semester exam, which is 25% down from 30% in previous semesters. I get a whole pile of questions from students saying, can I look at past editions? I've got my friend's book from 4 years ago, can I use the 3rd edition? Or I've got another business law textbook, can I use that? What I'd say about that is, past editions of this book are better than other books. The reason for that is keeps similar sort of cases, but obviously some of the stuff will be out of date. Other books are a problem because different lawyers, different authors use different cases as an example for legal principles. So if you're in the final exam, you're expected to be able to cite cases and talk about cases that we have talked about in the lectures here. If you have another textbook, you won't be citing those cases that we've learned. And that's a very, very important part of this subject. So my advice to everyone is get the textbook, get a copy of it, heaps of second-hand copies. There must be thousands out there if you don't want to buy a new one, okay? You will be able to resell the new one though in first semester next year, for sure. So you'll be able to get some money back then. But after first semester next year, it goes on to the new edition, so just be aware of that. Course material. The other thing I'd say to you guys, and some of you mightn't know about this, it's not officially a University of Queensland thing, but QU Books is a bookstore at near BBC College, and I used to get a lot of my books from there. You can join up, I think by memory when I was a student you joined up for like $5 and then you got a percentage off for every book, and it saved me quite a bit by the end of my degree. So it's just another option for you, maybe to save a little bit of money if you are buying the book. So you can have a look at that. And they do delivery as well to campus. Okay, the ECP. So please go through it really, really well. It amazes me still, and I know some students work and have other things on, obviously, and family commitments. But it amazes me some of the things which are outlined here that in week 13, just before the final exam, students are still asking me about the course. So just have read through this in the next few weeks. I'll go to the ECP now and we'll just have a little talk about that. So obviously announcements page, what I've started to do just because students seem to like it is when I put up an announcement I click the reply to all so it goes out as an email regardless of what the announcement is. I've done that simply because a couple of students have said to me over the time, oh, I didn't look at Blackboard and I didn't get the announcement till too late. So I just send them all out as an email now as well. So that's how I do that. Course profile, have a look through. I've been through course staff for you with my details. Course help is really important, and I've been over all of these documents in the last few weeks. So obviously there's the prescribed text that'll help you there in my office location. But introduction to the course and how to do well, those are these slides. Guide to time management, study techniques and summary notes. I've updated that this semester, and it's a more detailed version about how I'm going to tell you in the first half of today you should study for the course. And if you're in first year, a good study technique for all of your subjects. I was really interested. I had a student last semester, a older student, so had come back to university, and he came to me and he said, oh, it was the third time he was doing this course. He'd failed twice a long time ago, and the structure was amazing. And he started doing what I said in the first half of the lecture, and he said, I wished I'd done that throughout my degree. It makes it so much easier. And he ended up with a 5. So he's gone from 2 fails to a 5. And that, please take on board what I'm saying to you, because I wish I'd done it when I'd started my degrees. In the first couple of years, maybe didn't have as good a study pattern as I should have. And towards the end of my degree, halfway through towards the middle, I started doing what I suggest you do now, and my grades escalated, skyrocketed. So take note of what I'm saying. I know everyone won't do it, but the number of students in the last semester and the previous semester who have, and as you'll see later on in these slides, the grades have been quite super. There were a lot last semester that did. So I'll sort of say to you how to do that, and you can work out whether you are going to do that. But I do suggest it. I think it works really well. I do outline it in that lot of notes there. So that is there for you for your benefit. There's an example, the first 3 or 4 pages of what I suggest as well. So if you go and you download that document, you'll actually see a previous student's work that I've got permission for them to put up, the first couple of pages, to see how they've set it out. And basically what I suggest to everyone is everything in the course you condense into a single document. A lot of university exams now are open book, and a lot of them require you to have knowledge over a number of weeks of the semester, and putting it all into one document and not having a whole bunch of different things works particularly well. I've got the student's document here with me, and I leave it up on my desk throughout the semester, and this is why I have hundreds of students coming to see me, because they come and have a look through the document and see how the past student worked it. This was a student who got 21 out of 30 on her mid-sem and ended up with a fairly secure 7 overall. So think about, she lost 9% on her mid-sem and ended up with a 7 overall and almost got perfect marks on the final exam. And we had many of them last semester. It was incredible marking those papers. So you will see how it works, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit later. There's also a guide that I've written to the ILAC technique and answering legal problems, and that'll help you with basically the structure of what we do all throughout the semester. The course is now tailored to a particular type of learning, and that is answering legal problems. There used to be short answer questions and a whole lot of other stuff. All that's cut, so all you do now is you go through this course learning about the law and learning about how to answer problems in the law given particular scenarios. Your assignment, your tutes, your final exam, all do that. So it's all aimed towards that final exam in the examination period. I've uploaded an academic integrity thing there. If you're in first year, you should read that. University takes academic integrity seriously. Most often during a semester there's 1 or 2 students who get questioned for it. As the pieces of assessment come up, I will talk to you a little bit about that in more detail. So that'll be something we talk about as the assessment comes up. And there are a couple of other links there as well. So that's course help. Learning resources. All of my material for the course usually is found under here in Teaching Weeks. So if there's a little bit of a discussion there. I haven't got to week 3 yet. It's something I'm going to do this week, and hopefully put up most of the material for the semester is what I'm hoping in the first couple of weeks, so you can go ahead and print it and all that sort of stuff. If there's a tutorial in that week, it'll be found under this folder as well. You just click on the folder and you'll find the tutorial material in here and the lecture slides in here. So that's learning resources. Assessment. You'll find all the descriptions there under the 4 assessment folders, and any documents, for instance, like the problem set, the assignment later in the semester, all documents will go into there. In the mid-semester exam folder, for instance, I've got a copy of the answer sheet, so you can see how to fill out a multiple choice answer sheet. We go through that closer to the exam as well. Your results, PowerPoints, all that sort of thing for those assessment items will go into there. The other thing I draw your attention to is the FAQs. It's probably worthwhile, and I have to update this, but it's probably worthwhile going and having a read through all of these questions and answers. So what I generally do is, if there's a good question that a student asks and a couple of students ask it, I go and pop it up in the FAQs, and it's done into tutorials and tutorial questions, mid-sem, ILAC problem, final exam, lectures, textbook, problem set scenario. So it's under those different topics, and if you have any questions about the course by the end of today, it's likely that it'll probably be answered there. So you should go and have a read through that maybe in the first couple of weeks as well. Okay. Little bit about me. I actually started off, I did a law degree, and then I started off loving music, and I did music here, and I played the violin and piano and sung, and I was going to go down that field, and then I got offered a tutoring position in law. And I've always liked the idea of teaching, and I sort of fell in love with the teaching aspect of stuff. And then my progression has just been from tutor to lecturer to course coordinator. I course coordinate this course. I've lectured also in civil law, corporate law, and different areas. And then I also take a postgraduate course in semester 1. And the postgraduate course is international students who come here, have done a law degree overseas, and they want to learn about our system and do a Masters of Law. It's a very similar course to this one, except more detail and a little bit more academically challenging, I guess. I've used that course as a springboard for this one because it has less students. So I've introduced different assessment items there, and then they've worked, got good feedback, brought them in here, and they've worked here. So it's been sort of a process of using the two courses to bounce off each other. I love assessment, and I love looking at new ways of assessing, and that sort of area is something that I'm potentially going to do a PhD on, I think, especially in the area of law. I like teaching this subject especially because most of you have no knowledge of the law. And most of you come in here a little bit resilient to it. I've had students who've said to me, I'm in 4th year, I wish I'd done this first. I actually really liked it. I wish I could have changed to a law degree, but it's too late now. And you've totally changed my opinion on law, which is really, really rewarding. So hopefully you guys, by the end of this course, get that same sort of feeling about it. And I'll try to make it as interesting as I possibly can for you. This is me also. So this is my other aspect of my life, and it's dog judging. And it's dog judging in all sorts of different places. So I've been to about 40 countries, I think. The strangest ones probably Egypt and Guatemala, judging dogs. And I judge in Canada at the end of the year, so just before exam, but I'll only be there for a few days. But that's just something I do. So I always say to my students, if you find me emailing at some ridiculous hour of the morning, potentially it's of course I'm overseas, but this semester I'm not going anywhere, and I've got a lot to do with the course and different things. So I'm going over Christmas, but not this semester. But that's something I've done for a very long time, and it's a really interesting component to go with my teaching and my studies. Okay, so course material and assessment. 4 assessment items. So you have tutorial submissions. They've changed this semester. You have mid-semester exam. That's also changed this semester. You have an ILAC problem scenario that's remained more or less the same. And you have a final exam which has remained the same as well. Teaching weeks 1 and 2 are assessed on the mid-sem. So what we do in the second half of today and what we do next week, that's your mid-semester exam content. It is a simple multiple choice exam. I think a lot of students, I'll talk a bit more about that in about 5 minutes. The rest of the course, so teaching week 3 to 13, that's what's going to be on your final exam. And it's going to be all legal scenario problems. So you're going to get 3 of them. And I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Teaching week 3 onwards covers what I call the actual proper law. So we get onto the topics of torts, negligence and so on. And the first couple of weeks just gives you an introduction to our system. It covers a little bit of political stuff, legislation, how courts are made up, how law is passed in Parliament, all that sort of thing. It's fairly interesting too, because it just gives you a little bit of an overview of our system and how everything works, and that sort of segues nicely into the rest of the course. Okay, mid-semester. It used to be, well, every other semester previously, it's been 30 out of 30 questions. This semester it's going to be 25 questions because I've put more percentage marks into the tutorial work. So 25 questions total, 1% each, meaning you get 1 mark for a correct answer. It's closed book. So this is the only thing in the course where you can't take in materials with you. You can take in a bilingual dictionary, no problem, but nothing of the actual material. So you do have to study for this and you do have to memorise it. Test will be scheduled by central exams on a Saturday time in the mid-sem break, or the mid-semester examination period, which is a 3-week period. And it's going to be one of those 3 dates, 31st of August, 7th of September or 14th of September. So a couple of things about that. Think about this. If we cover the content this week and next, that is a fair while till that mid-semester exam. So you're going to be expected to remember, and it's just the way the exam period goes, you're going to be expected to remember the content for the first couple of weeks then, which is probably 3 weeks away. We usually are early on, because I request that, so we're usually in the first week or the second week, but I'm totally at the whim of the university and the examinations, so it's up to them, it's not up to me. What that means is the students who do best tend to just every day read a tiny little bit. And what I say to you guys is, you know, the first 4 chapters is not a great deal. But if you say read 5 to 10 pages a day, might take you 10 minutes. By the time the mid-semester exam comes round, you will have probably read through the first 4 chapters 3 or 4 times, and you should remember pretty well what's going on. So I don't ask for a lot, but consistent little work will probably have you do fairly well there. In tutorial 1, now this is a big thing for the change of tutorial structure. Because of the way the tutes have changed and you only get 5 now instead of 10, the first tutorial, it's usually the second, but the first tutorial is going to be a mock mid-semester exam, which I introduced a couple of semesters ago. So you're actually going to be hit with pretty hard work in week 3. It usually gives students a bit of a wake-up call, because the mid-semester exam, I have a lot of students in this course who find that exam the hardest. Because the rest of the course, when I'm getting you to do problems and teaching you that, I can really teach you that. And I can steer you on that path and I can direct where you're going. The mid-semester exam is more you just learning the material and you understanding the material and having done a bit of work and reading the book. So a lot of students at the end of the course say mid-semester exam was the hardest. It's also not good if it hits you really badly. I've had students get 4 out of 30. Really hit hard on the mid-sem because they were not prepared. And if you get that sort of a mark and you're trying to achieve 6s and 7s, it's very, very difficult. As I said, even the girl who did these notes got 21 out of 30. She wasn't thrilled with that mark because she was a very high achieving student. And she came to me straight after the results were out and said, is there much point in me doing a whole lot of work in this course because I don't think I'll be able to get my 7. And I said, I can assure you if you do work and you structure it well and you go in there, you can get your 7. And she did, and she did quite comfortably. But what you have to realise is study for your mid-semester exam. Do not have that come upon you if you're a high-achieving student and think it's just going to be easy. It's also the only examination in the course where I will assess you a little bit on material not covered here in the lecture. So for the mid-semester exam, anything in the textbook is fair game. It doesn't mean that I ask you really silly, obscure little questions from the footnotes, but if there is a bigger topic that we haven't necessarily covered in here because of time, those bigger topics, those bigger principles are able to be asked in that mid-sem. And in the mock exam that I give you in the first tutorial, there are examples of that. And I think, as I said before, I think students get a little bit of a wake-up call then, because I usually do about 10 to 15 questions, and maybe some students get 1 or 2 out of 10 to 15, and they think, wow, I really need to start studying. So that's something I'll talk to you about in the next couple of weeks, but out of that, what should you do? Start now, because your gauge and how you know you're going in the course will be able to be seen in that first tutorial and how you go in that practice examination, okay? Closed book exams, they're a benefit for students who study, and they're a real problem for students who don't. Because if you don't study, you have no material to fall back on. If you don't know the content, it's a pure guess. If you have done study, you should do pretty well. So just be aware of that. The other thing I will say to you is, I had a shocking thing second semester last year, which was my first years having like 2 or 3 exams on the same day as mine. And mine was the last in the line, and it really lowered the grades because you had a lot on. So what I say to students now is, if you start now, it's better, because you could potentially get the mid-sem timetable out and have multiple mid-semester exams from your subjects on the same day. And that's hard, so you have to be well prepared for that. So just be aware of that going into it. As soon as I know the mid-sem dates, I will relay it to you. Okay, tutorials, totally changed. I've got a whole lot of data here that I'll go over with you, but to me, tutorials are essential in this course. I reflect a lot of the examinable material at the end of the course and in the final exam from tutes. I tend to always, in the final exam, have a question in there that will reward the students who went to tutorials. I will reward you if you turn up. I do the same thing with students who listen to and attend lectures, and that's kind of how I structure the course. So if you're willing to put into it, you will get back out of it what you put into it. The tutes used to be an hour, which of course is 50 minutes. And what I found over the years was there was not a whole lot of time to be able to actually get into the content. And students in the final exam found time a particular issue. So the 2 hours with 3 questions running out of time. So last year I thought to myself, how can I kind of broach that and force students to practice timed questions? So what I've done is changed the tutorial structure from 10 50-minute tutes to 5 bi-weekly 2-hour tutes. And what I'm going to do there is, in the first hour, we're going to do a normal tutorial, sort of talking about a question, going through the answer together. And then the second hour is actually going to be a similar area of law timed, like you're in a final exam. And it's going to be 40 minutes, exactly the same time as you get per question in a final. And in a tutorial environment over 5 tutes, you're going to get 5 practices, more or less at the same time limit in the final exam. And what's left in the tutorial will then allow you to swap an answer with the person next to you, and the tutor will go through it on the board, the answer, and you'll see how good you are in that 40 minutes. And what I'm hoping is, by the end of the semester, it means that students kind of know how long they've got for each question, and they've had practice on answering those questions under that time limit, and we'll see if it works. I hope it does. It's a trial this semester, but I think in my head it's going to be good. I think it's going to work. They're 2% also, so each tutorial you'll hand in to your tutor an answer to a written problem. And it's always been 1%. This semester it's 2%. And what I'm saying to the tutors is, for a terrible effort scribbled on the bus that consists of 2 lines, it's going to be 0 out of 2. For an average effort that's obviously rushed, 1 out of 2. And if you put a decent effort, 2 out of 2. It's very easy to do a decent effort. It has nothing to do with right or wrong, so you don't have to get it right. You just have to have tried, and you have to have tried well. And it's going to be great practice for your final exam, because every question you get that you can try on is going to be the same standard of question you're going to get in the final. So that's kind of how it works. So it is practice for the final exam, and then the questions that you do in your tutorials is further practice for the final exam, and also the assignment, which is a similar sort of thing. As I've said, their answers don't have to be correct, and what I expect is about 2 A4 written pages, and that's kind of about the standard you'd want. It's probably a bit less than you'd be expected to do in the final exam, but you can usually get out a pretty good answer in that time and in that amount. It does give tutors the ability to be able to not give you the 2 if you haven't done a decent effort. So more so than previous semesters, and that's what I want to try to encourage everyone to just give a decent effort to it. I would say 30 to 45 minutes every 2 weeks is all you would need. Think to yourself, in the final exam, 40 minutes is all I get. So if I try to do these questions in 40 minutes, you'll get your 2 marks. If you put 40 minutes effort into it every bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, you'll get 2 out of 2. By the end of the course, that is 10 out of 10. And think about this realistically, it is a whole grade. It is a 65 to 75 and a 75 to 85. You go from a 5 to a 6 or a 6 to a 7 just by doing tutorial work. And there is a massive correlation between tutorial work and tutorial attendance and good grades. And I've done a whole lot of research on this, and I'll show you in 2 slides' time because I've got all the stats for you. If you're registered in tutorial, now you have to go to your right tutorial. So please pay attention to this. If you're registered in tutorial numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15, 17 or 19, you'll be taught in teaching weeks 4, 6, 8, 10 and 13. So it means that your first tutorial, if you're in one of those tute numbers, will be in week 4, teaching week 4. If you're in the even numbers, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, etc., your first tutorial will be actually first in teaching week 3, 5, 7, 9 and 12. And as I said to you in that first tute, it'll be a very easy 2% because the questions are really basic from today and next week. And then you'll have that mock mid-semester practice exam as well in the second half. So it's a very important first tutorial. Okay, benefit of tutorials. So I haven't ever done this before. I pulled up the stats from Sem 1. We had 123 sevens. The largest number of 7s, I think, ever in this subject. It equates to about 1 in every 7 students got a 7 in Laws 1100, which was unbelievable. It doubled, I think, from the previous year. And the answers were, it made me so happy as a teacher. You have no idea marking that final exam and seeing the quality of what students were producing consistently. Really, really good. There were 222 sixes. So 345 students, more than 1 out of 3, got a 6 or a 7 in this course, which is unbelievable for students who've never studied law before. How many fails? 75. Of those fails, most were students who had never attended a tute or didn't sit their mid-sem for some reason, or never handed in their assignment. So they were all ones that I just thought, it would have been really easy to pass just by doing minimal work. In the last 5 semesters, there have been over 400 grades of 7. 15 of those students didn't have full tutorial marks. So if you want a 7, you go to the tutes and you get your full marks. And when I say 15, probably 15 out of 15 of those had 4 out of 5 when it was 4 out of 5, when it was out of 5%. There was not one student I don't believe there was one student who got a 7 who had never been to a tute. So that's the stats there. In the last 5 semesters, roughly 5,000 students, there have been only 36 students who have failed the course who have been awarded full marks. So in 2.5 years, with over 1,000 students a semester, 36 students failed. So that's a very small statistic. And last semester, 51 students would have been awarded a higher grade had they submitted their tutorial marks. So these are students who submitted 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 5 and ended up just below the cut-off. So if you'd had 51 of those students, would have been bumped up if they'd just submitted what they should have. And I think the grades in previous semesters have been more than that, because I really encouraged students to go to tutes last semester. So basically, tutes usually mean good grades, and tutes prepare you for your assessment, especially in this course, because that's how I've worked it. ILAC problem scenario. What I got when I was a tutor in Laws 1100 6 years ago was students who said, I liked the tutes, but I got to the final exam and I felt underprepared, because really the first time that I'd been formally assessed on a final exam type question was in the final exam. So what I do with this piece of assessment is exactly the same percentage as the final, 15%. You are graded on a question of the same standard that you would get in the final exam, and you get feedback on it. So it's basically an ability for you to see how you're going, only on a 15% piece of assessment, and then get a general huge feedback document on where students went right or wrong and where they could improve. And it happens towards the end of the course leading up to the final. So assessment and structure, the way I look at it is it's a stepping stone thing. If you keep stepping up a step, by the time you get to the final exam, which is the top step, you should be able to do it pretty well. And that's kind of how I structure it. It'll be released on Blackboard, and you can go to the ECP and the learning activities and see when it all gets released. But at 9 a.m. on Thursday the 19th, you get 5 days to do it, so it's heaps of time. And on the 24th, you submit your response online. I will be giving him heaps more information about this as the semester progresses. It's a 20% task overall, because it also then has a 5% reflective thing, which will be due in the tutes. And this piece of assessment, I think, has maybe worked the best out of any of them. And what I do is, after you do that assignment, I release a document that has an answer to that question. And the answer has good parts and the answer has bad parts. And you get 5 out of 5 for telling me about different parts of the answer. So I highlight a part and say, what do you think? And you just write 2 or 3 lines on this is good because or this is poor because. It's the easiest 5 marks you'll ever get in your university life, but it teaches you a lot. And I think last semester there were over 900 students out of the 1,000 who submitted that. So they were great efforts. And in the evaluations at the end, it was the first time I'd introduced it last semester. The evaluation said that piece of assessment was great, and that taught me a lot. So I'll also talk to you a little bit about that as we go through as well. Final exam. Culmination of the course, 3 questions, exactly the same standard as you get in tutes, exactly the same standard as you get in the ILAC assignment question. Open book, and this is where this comes into it. This is where this is absolutely critical, and I think it's on the next slide I talked to you about. Open book means you can bring in anything you want. I always say to my students, if you wanted to bring in a wheelbarrow full of business law textbooks and plant it next to your desk, apart from it being a fire hazard, it would be allowed. You can bring in every single thing that you want. Textbook, tute notes, lecture notes, anything. Other law textbooks. The problem with that is you get 2 hours. And 2 hours for 3 questions means it's 40 minutes a question, which means that the timing is an issue. And if you're going into your business law textbook and you haven't done anything throughout the semester, and you're trying to find the information in here, you're not going to go particularly well, because you're going to get about 1 to 2 questions done and the time will be up. And that's the big problem. And I've seen students 3-4 years ago, when I was a tutor watching, come to grief with that sort of situation in the final exam. There were very few students last semester where I read their papers and they had really badly run out of time. Most students managed it pretty well. So follow what I'm saying to do, and hopefully you won't be in that situation, please. It's only teaching weeks 3 to 13. At the end of the semester, I'm very kind with my questions. I really direct you into, in the final exam, what I want you to talk about. And there'll be more information on that as we go through. But I almost say to you, you know, please answer this question using this area of law. So it's not as big a deal as you might think at the moment. There'll be a lot of discussion about the final exam throughout the semester. And open books, of course. People think it's really easy. It's really not. I used to find open books worse than closed books, because there's that mentality with students to think, oh, I can just rely upon my textbook. And for a law exam, you can't. It's not a great idea to do that. You might pass. You probably will pass, but good grades are going to be hard to find if you do that. Okay, how to do well. It's a 2-unit course. The university always says about 10 hours of your time a week, 3 contact hours per week, and then the rest completing different things. It's a bit out of turn or out of school to say this. I don't think you need 7 hours a week for Laws 1100 if you do it properly and if you keep up to date with everything. I've had students very successfully tell me 2 to 3 hours of their own time a week will allow them to do what I'm suggesting you do. So that's kind of how it works, and that's what I expect of you. And if you do it every week, by the time you get to the final exam, you will be ready for it. Attend the lectures. I give hints. You will note that throughout the semester. My voice intonation, the way I put things across, I give hints. I do that for those of you who listen and those of you who attend lectures. And so very smart students going through, when they're doing their notes, will put little asterisks and little comments of when I do that, because you will find it benefits you in the final and benefits you in different parts of the course. Lectures as well, prepare for them, give it a good go, concentrate on your tutorials, and your tutorials will benefit you. Okay, the summaries. So, strong correlation between tutorial attendance and participation, lecture attendance and revision of the material is what will get you a good grade in the final. About 2 years ago, I developed this idea of, you have lecture material, I give you slides every week. You have a textbook with more stuff in it. You have tutorial slides and tutorial documents and stuff that I purposefully give you in tutorials only for those who show up to tutorials. And what I say to the students who want high marks in that is put it all into one document. Because in the final exam, in a timed 2-hour exam, if everything you need is in that, you're going to be doing pretty well. I've had students who find English quite difficult, and this has helped them so much because they have everything ordered and structured right there, and they can go through an answer and methodically and slowly progress what they've done throughout the semester, and it really will help you. It's in my office 24 hours a day, and this was the student who ended up with a 7, and she was struggling after the mid-semester exam, and she did so well on the rest of the course. I would say last semester I would have been up to 300 to 400 students out of the close to 950 I think we had, who did really good notes like this, and then maybe 200 students who did something like this, their own version of it. It basically is sitting down, and I explain it in that document, but it's sitting down with your lecture slides as the start and putting it into an order and structure. And as you'll see if you come to my office, she even has a table of contents with the page numbers there for every different area and topic. And starts with the lecture material, and then where in the lecture I've had gaps or talked about other things, gone to the textbook and added it in, and any extra tutorial material added it in. And about 2 to 3 hours a week, I think, produces that by the end of the course. And really, the students who do that throughout the semester come to me in SWATVAC and say, I don't need to do much study in Laws 1100. I can concentrate on other courses because everything I need is there. I give you very detailed tutorial slides, and the tutorial slides will have very detailed answers towards the beginning of the course, less detailed answers as we go through. They also sometimes put the tutorial question answers straight into that document. So it basically means if you go onto the final exam and you get a torts question, you go to page 11 and you have everything you need in the next 5 pages to answer a question. And that's how the basically course is structured. And every piece of assessment, bar the mid-semester exam, is like that. So this document is what you should be doing. If you have friends in the course and you trust them and you think they're up to the academic standard that you want, share the work. I had 3 friends come to the office last semester, had a look at it, and decided that the different teaching weeks would be shared between them, so it's less work to do. If you meet people in a tutorial, you can do the same. Say hello, become a friend, and share the workload. There's no plagiarism in the final exam. I don't care if 950 students have exactly the same words in an answer, because you're doing it independently and you're answering a legal problem. A perfect world would have everyone the same, because technically you might all have the correct answer, written on 3 pages, coming from the same lot of notes, and you can do that, no problem at all. The only thing I'd caution you with is relying upon other people. You haven't done the material yourself, and you aren't as abreast of the material as the other ones would be, your other friends would be. So just be aware of that. You need to be knowledgeable on the material to be able to cover it well. Almost every week, you're going to get sick of me saying this, I remind you of the summaries and say, how is everyone going? And in the first couple of weeks, my suggestion to you guys is come and see me. I'm here all day today, all day. I'm here all day for the rest of the week, apart from when I'm teaching. Come up, pop in, and I'll show you what to do. The other thing I have in my office is her exam paper. All 3 questions for you to have a look at as well. And what that means is that you can see, word for word, how she has put into her exam paper what she has here. So you can, I sit down on the desk and I say, watch my fingers. And on her exam paper and on her notes, I do this. And you'll see word for word how she's answered each question using her notes. Because that's what you do with law. You use the law to answer a question. So the benefit of that, for those of you who come and see me, you'll see it when you look at these notes and you look at her paper. Okay, responsibilities. I don't have to talk to you much about that. In the lectures, I will break after the first hour. Sometimes it can be a little content heavy, so we'll have a 5-minute break each week. And please don't, obviously, have your mobile phones on. Just normal university stuff. Checklist, make sure you've done all that. I've had weird situations where students haven't been enrolled and they thought they have. And make sure you have access Blackboard, looked at the ECP, and so on. My advice to you is I'll put the lecture slides up well in advance, print them off. What I tend to do is print 4 to a page each week when I'm looking off them, and you can then make your little notes on the side and different things. So it's generally a good way to do it. Okay, so 1 o'clock we finished. Have 5 minutes break, come back at 5 past, do the second half of the lecture. Pardon? No, not at all. No, all good. No, it's fine. That doesn't bother me at all. It's great that you're coming. Okay. A couple of things also I thought I should say. I think I'll do it week 3 this semester. It seems to have worked really well the last couple of semesters I've done it. I get a student from the previous semester to come in and just talk to you about their experience, I guess, in the course. The girl I've asked from last semester actually was the one who ended up topping the course. So she was remarkable with the marks she got. I think something like 97% out of 100 overall. So what I say to the student is just talk to you about their experiences, how they studied for it, what they did to do well. And then they're here. I get them towards the end of the lecture, and they're here just outside. And it's an ability for you to just be honest with them without me there, and you can just say, what did you think of this, and so on. So if you have any questions that you want to ask them, you can do so. So I think that will happen in about week 3, before the tutorials sort of start at the commencement of the tutes. Other thing I'd just say to you guys is the course content has also been restructured a little bit. So when you look at learning activities, and you look at what is taught in the different lectures, it hasn't changed dramatically, but just to fit in with the bi-weekly tute structure, I've moved some things around. So if you're relying upon a friend's notes, for instance, from last semester or something, some of the actual content has changed and been restructured, so just be aware of that. Okay, so this week, nice and simple stuff to introduce the law. Next week we get into a little bit more detail. The other thing I've done this semester, that was just some student feedback as to why I did this, is I've put in some mid-semester example type questions. They're on the more basic side, but you will get these sort of questions in the mid-sem. In actual fact, these exact questions have been on previous mid-semester exam papers. So I've gone through different papers over the time and put in these questions for you. And what I'm going to do is when we get to them, get to that material, give you a minute, think about it, talk about it with the person next to you, and then we'll give you the answer and we'll say why. So not only is there that practice exam in the tutes, there's also a little bit more correlation between the lecture material and giving you some examples of mid-semester questions in the lectures. Okay, so this week, look at what is law, how does the legal system in Australia function, why would your knowledge of the law be good for you just in the future, and not, as I said earlier, not just in relation to your career, but just personally as well. And there have been a lot of students that have come to me with questions just in their sort of personal life and interesting scenarios that have happened to them that relate to the course as they've learnt different stuff. And how might this subject benefit you? And hopefully by the end of the semester, you'll know a heap of ways as to why it will benefit you. The law goes into a whole lot of different things. Obviously, you all know police and you know courts and jail and contracts and politicians, and all of these different things relate to the law in some way. Some of these relate to the law we look at each week, in particular politics. All the laws in legislation, in acts, in criminal code, if you're a consumer and you get sold a faulty computer, all of these things have been passed through Parliament. That's part of our Australian system. So it's actually our politicians in a way that dictate the law in that regard. That's how legislation is passed. And that's something we will look at over the next couple of weeks, in the first few weeks of the course. I've talked there on this page about what is law. What you should just note down, there's no precise definition of what the law is. So if you go to 5 different business law textbooks, they'll all define it in some different way. And what I've done there in bold is given you the one that, and I don't think it's even in our textbook, but I've given you the one that I think is most appropriate, combining a whole lot of different stuff. I think the law has to be a system of rules But as you see down the bottom there, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, there's a big difference between a law and a rule. But it has to be a system of rules to start with. But not only a system of rules, it has to be made by someone, and that someone or that something has to be a proper authority. So it's a system of rules, in our case, made by the state, meaning made by the parliament, made by the politicians, and enforceable in some way. And that's another big difference between a rule and a law. So you have a system of rules made by someone who can actually make it, and then is enforceable in some way. In other words, you can get in trouble if you don't follow it. You could get fined, you could be put in jail, etc. There's other different definitions there as well. At its basic principle, what's the difference between a law and a rule? So I'll give you an example here. Those of you who catch the bus home, you get on the bus, it's packed at 5 o'clock, and you're sitting towards the front, and there's no seats anywhere. Little old lady, 85 years old, gets on the bus with her walking stick, and you sit there. And everyone else on the bus is quite old as well who's seated. You're the only young one. And you decide not to get up. Social rule, what do you think the social rule would be? The social rule would be, if you're on a bus and someone elderly gets on, you stand up for them and they sit in that seat. That's a rule, social rule. Is it a law? Not necessarily. Why not? Because it hasn't been made by someone who can make it, and it isn't enforceable in some way. Let's take it that that day there's the Minister for the St Lucia area also sitting on that bus, and he watches you not stand up for that elderly person, and he thinks it's really bad. So he goes to Parliament the next month, and he says in Parliament what he saw, and he says he'd like to enact legislation that counteracts that. And so after the process of Parliament, going through how to enact legislation, they pass the Aged Persons on Bus Act. And in the Aged Persons on Bus Act, the Act says any fit able person under the age of 40 years who does not stand up for a senior citizen will be fined up to a maximum of $1,000. You have taken a social rule, and the proper authority made by the state has then enforced that, and now it can be fined if you broke what is now a law. So it's gone from something that hasn't been made by a proper authority and can't be enforceable to something that now has been enacted by Parliament and is enforceable. And it's changed from one to the other. And that's basically, at its essentials, I guess, how law is passed here. That's the process it goes through. So big difference between what is a social rule and what is a law. For the purposes of your exam, if I was going to ask you a question on this, what I've got in bold there is what you should know. You should know those three areas. System of rules, made by someone who can make it, and enforceable in some way. And they are really the three areas that you'd be looking at to see what a law is. Purpose of the law. I've set really easy questions on this. It's an A, B, C, D answer, obviously. You know, which of the following is not a purpose of the law, which of the following is. And you know what the law does. It resolves disputes. If two parties have problems with each other, the law resolves that. It maintains social order. So obviously it keeps... Australia is very good for that. You know, on the whole, Australia is somewhere where the social order is maintained through our legal system. Protects disadvantaged and minority groups, which I think is a really fundamental part of our law. It means that everyone is the same under our law. It means that you can't favour a particular group, and I think that's a really important part of our legal system. Regulates the economy, obviously. Prevents the misuse of power, so people can't corrupt Corrupt people can't be in charge because our law regulates that, and enforces community values also. So if a large enough group of people get together and want to change the law, generally they can lobby and they can change it, and they do that through the political system and getting it through Parliament. It can be a long process, but generally it can happen. And there are others as well, and we might talk about some of those in the tutorials in week 1. Rule of law. I've put a question in 2 slides' time as well. I often put a rule of law question into the mid-semester exam. So often one of your 25 questions will be on this understanding of what the rule of law is. The rule of law is kind of the guiding concept at the top of our legal system, with a whole bunch of principles that you kind of have to follow. Many suggested definitions of it, but really the rule of law is just a whole pile of thoughts that come together as this general overarching concept of how our legal system works. So a couple of them. It envisages that the law must be accessible and, so far as possible, intelligible, clear and predictable. What does that mean? It means that the likes of you guys, who haven't necessarily studied law before, should be able to look it up. Accessible means that you should be able to access it. And when you do access it, you should be able to understand it. The normal layperson meaning a person not necessarily involved in the law, should be able to understand what our law is if they want. And in our legal system in Australia, we have quite a good system of self-representation. People like you who decide, I don't want to pay for a lawyer and I'm going to go to court and I'm going to represent myself. And they can do that because it's intelligible, it's easy to understand and it's clear. When drafting legislation, you should not draft legislation that is overly complicated and complex. The normal person, not well versed in law, should be able to read it and understand it. And that's a principle of the rule of law. It dictates that the law must be passed by a proper authority. Kind of what I was saying to you on the last slide. For law to become law, a proper authority, body, government, parliament, has to enact it, has to pass it. In a proper manner, meaning can't be corrupt. They can't pass it improperly. They can't advantage themselves in that process, as an example. And questions regarding rights and liabilities should be resolved by the application of law and not by the exercise of discretion. Discretion is an interesting word there, and discretion, of course, means kind of at their own whim. Discretion I've used this in an exam question, and it confused lots of students as to what it means. Law should not be up to discretion, because discretion means you can do with as you like according to how you understand it. The law is the law, and discretion shouldn't be in there. The law should be applied according to what the law is. So discretion isn't what you're looking for. So be aware of that if you've got an exam question on that. At its most basic level, the rule of law is defined as the concept where both the government and its citizens know and understand it and will obey it. You have countries, and we've seen in past centuries, regimes where the people have to abide by the law and the government and the people making the law don't. And we look at that in terms of a dictatorship. It means the government are above the people. In Australia, we have a very strict system where the government is not above the people. And if the government does something wrong, the news and the media and the people are going to pounce on them. We see that quite regularly. So everyone, regardless of who you are, has to abide by the law. And that's part of our rule of law here. You can write down a way of you look at it from a lawyer's point of view is the law has to be black and white. It means the law has to be consistent and has to be maintained, and it has to be consistent for everyone who is a citizen in Australia. Rule of law. There are certain aspects of the rule of law that apply to most areas of the law that you'll be taught this semester. As I said before, the law should be equal to all. Everyone, including the government, is bound by it. Ministers and public officers must exercise the powers conferred upon them in good faith, fairly, and for a proper purpose, which means that they can't exceed their powers. So as soon as a politician exceeds their powers, it's plastered all over the media. It's on the front page of the Courier Mail the next day. And that shows you that everyone here in Australia is supposed to abide by the law like everyone else. Law will protect fundamental human rights, so that's also intrinsic to our rule of law, such as protection from slavery, protection from property, and so on. So the basic fundamental rights are incorporated into our rule of law. Means must be provided for resolving, without prohibitive cost or lengthy delay, genuine civil disputes for which the parties themselves are unable to resolve. That goes to our court system. So basically what that means is our rule of law allows a normal person fairly speedily to be able to resolve their dispute via our legal system. Go to the court, have it heard by a magistrate or a judge, and get given a decision back in a timely, effective sort of manner. And we'll talk about that a little bit more next week when we look at the court structure. Judicial procedures provided by the state should be fair. That's absolutely fundamental. Our court system, our judges are probably at the top of our legal system, and they're the ones who have to give the decisions and apply the law to the facts. And the law is not retrospective, and the law is enforceable. What does retrospective mean? It means you can't go back and say, law was brought in today, and 10 years ago you would have broken what the law is today, so 10 years ago you are guilty. It means that you can't go back in the past and change what's been done. Retrospective, go back. So that's kind of what that means. So if law changes today from that point, from that date, cases then get applied to it. Okay. So this question, I think from second semester last year maybe, which of the following is not a characteristic of the rule of law? So this is the type of question you're going to get in your mid-sem exam. A fairly short question. There are longer questions definitely, which you'll see in the tutorials in tutorial 1. 30 seconds. See what the person next to you thinks. See what answer you think it is. Have a chat, introduce yourself if you don't know each other. Be social. Now, when I set this question, who honestly put E? I'm sure there'd be a number of you. And it's the old Laws 1100 trick. And this is one thing I'm going to point out to you now, and I point out to my students in the tutes. None of the above or all of the above seems to be this obsession with Laws 1100 students. When I mark their papers or when it goes through the system and they get the results back. I remember one year one student coming to me and she got 22 out of 30. And in the feedback she wanted to see which one she got wrong. 7 out of the 8 that she got wrong were where she had incorrectly put none of the above or all of the above for the answer, and it wasn't that answer. Be very careful with a question like this. Who put A? Who put B? Who put C? Who put D? Who put E? Yeah. What did I tell you before when we were looking through those slides? The law must be resolved by the exercise of discretion. So can the law be resolved by using your own personal judgment? Nope. So C is the one that's not a characteristic of the rule of law. One thing I'll point out to you, and this is what you have to be careful of and not rush it in the mid-sem exam. Most of you got that right, which was really good, by the way. This is correct. And this is one of the things I want you to understand. Don't just, and in your tutorial questions, when we do the practice mid-sem, you'll get examples of this, where students read, the law must be passed by a proper authority in a proper manner, yeah, okay, this is right. And then move on to number D, and yes, it's right, and move on to number E and go, well, none of the above because all of them are right. And the number of students who've come to me in feedback and in tutes and gone, oh, I didn't read the whole answer, is huge. So read everything. If you're going to have a question that says which of the following is or is not, make sure you read word 1 to the last word of each thing to make sure that you're getting the right one. Because the trick there is putting E, and the trick there is not reading through everything in C and getting that wrong. So just be aware of that. So C is the correct answer there. And these are the types of questions you're going to get. Changing the law. It can be a fast process, it can be a very slow process. How long does it take to change the law? It can change through societal change. It can change because political parties think that they will win votes by changing the law in a particular way. It can be very slow to change because political parties think that it won't be popular, and so they don't go ahead with it. And we've seen topical things like, for instance, Indigenous land rights here in Australia, gay marriage more recently. How many years was gay marriage a topic of political debate? And yet, time after time after time after time, political parties in power did nothing about it. Because they were maybe in fear of what public opinion would be. Indigenous land rights in the 1970s, no political party countered that. And it actually was left up to the courts in a judicial decision to make the decision on Indigenous land rights. So legal change in regards to legislation can be quite fast if they want it to be, and it can be years and years and years and very slow if they don't want it to be. And that's because it has to go through a system, which we'll learn next week, where it goes through both houses, gets voted upon, and then becomes legislation. And if a particular party doesn't want it to go in, they can keep blocking it if they have the numbers to do so. So changing the law is quite interesting. It can change because of community values. If you have a large enough group of people that they're going to sway political opinion, you can get together and you can probably successfully change the law. And of course, technology also has a part in changing the law as things develop and things occur. Law and justice and law and ethics, one of my favourite topics when I studied law at university, in a subject called jurisprudence, which is all about law and ethics and legal thinking, I guess, legal philosophy. Law and justice, most of the time, and law and ethics, most of the time these concepts go together, most of the time. Usually a law is just, usually a law is ethical. This is something that we're going to have a look at in the first tute. It'll be one of your questions, I think, that I set for you in the first tute. But the answer to this is, do law and ethics always go together? And the answer is no, because if you had a poll in this room of everyone sitting here, what one person thinks is ethical and what one person thinks is not ethical doesn't necessarily correlate. It doesn't mean that everyone in this room thinks the same thing. And on big political issues, the sensitive ones, the topics, and we'll discuss this in Toots, but the topics like medicinal marijuana, abortion, death penalty, a whole lot of politically sensitive issues. If you took a poll in this class here, there would not be 100% in favour of one or the other. You are always going to get mixed opinions. And so what's ethical is up for debate. I used to say this in my toots, but then I started to lecture and I thought I'd introduce it as a really interesting thing in week one. So there was this case that I learnt about in jurisprudence. It was called Spelunky and Explorers case. Some of you may have heard about this before. Spelunky and Explorers case was this hypothetical legal scenario, and overseas there have actually been classes, semesters devoted to this particular topic in this case. And there was an author and he wrote up about this hypothetical legal scenario. Back in the 1700s, so ages ago, a group of explorers go into a cave. And they go deep into the cave and there's a cave in. So the entrance to the cave, all the rocks crash in and they can't get out. They have limited supplies, limited food, limited water. They go back to the entrance. They can hear the outside world, but the outside world can't hear them. So they hear the people on the outside saying, these 9 explorers, they only have about a week left. In 1700s, we don't have the technology, don't have the equipment to get them out in time. It'll take us a couple of weeks to get them out, and they'll all be dead by then. So the 9 of us, let's say it's this little segment here, are in this cave and we hear that. And we think to ourselves, what are we going to do? 1700s, we know we're all going to die if we don't do something about it. So we come to a decision. This is where it starts getting a bit gruesome. What do you think they do? Yeah, people who whispered cannibalism there would be correct. So we decide to eat someone. And we each go round our group and we say to each other, you happy with this? And everyone comes to the conclusion of yes. And we get a pile of rocks that we find in the cave and we say, okay, is everyone happy that whoever draws out the smallest rock is the one that's going to give up their life for the rest of us? We all say yes. And then I draw the smallest rock. And I say, well, I'm not happy with this anymore. I don't want to be part of this. And I go and sit in the corner. And they all have a group discussion and they decide to kill and eat me anyway. So they do. And in 2 weeks' time, they get out of the cave. They've all lived. What's the result of this? In 1700s, what was the law? So technically, what did the other 8 people do to me? What do you reckon? Yep, murder. In 1700s, what do you think the penalty for murder was? Death. So you've just eaten someone, been forced to eat someone, you get to the outside world, you get to the court system, and the crime that you committed is death. So technically the 8 people killed someone, and that's the case before the court. And what they do in this hypothetical scenario is they then pose the different types of judges you can get. And this is where ethics becomes so interesting, because you have the judge who morally and ethically thinks that is so wrong. And so on moral grounds, they sentence them to death. You have the judge that is a black and white judge. The law is the law, and regardless of what you think morally and ethically in that situation, you have to apply it. Death. You have the judge who ethically thinks they did the right thing. You have the judge who interprets the law that in actual fact they all came to a contract in that cave, and so by applying the law they are contractually bound. And then you have the judge, and this is the really interesting one, the judge who says in that cave, this is the abstract legal thinking. So you have kind of 4 judges who sort of apply the law and ethics how you'd expect. And then you have the judge who says, in that cave at that time, no one really can put themselves in that position. And so none of the legal rules laws and legal things of the outside world can be applied to them. So what they decide in that cave at that time under that pressure and in that circumstance, we can't blame them for. And they acquit. And at the end of this case, after you've gone through all these different types of legal opinions, it's a draw. And I think they do 3-3. 3 saying yes, it should be capital punishment, death penalty. 3 saying yeah, they should be acquitted. And then it's up to you. So they pose this hypothetical legal scenario of what type of lawyer are you? It all boils down to this, law and ethics. It all boils down to, do you think it's ethical? Do you think it's not? Are you following the law or are you not? And depending upon the person that you are and depending upon the country that you're in, would depend upon how you see that. And different areas like death penalty and abortion and these sort of highly sensitive topics are different in the different countries that you go to. And you can have some quite polar opposite laws that you're dealing with. So it's a really interesting point. It's one thing that I'll say to you all. I love in this course a little bit of freedom of thought. And there have been, and you'll learn this after the semester, my way of teaching law is, so long as you can justify what you're saying and pose a good argument, you'll be rewarded for that. And you could disagree with my understanding of the law and my answer and still get full marks, because that's what law is all about. Technically, you go to court because 2 sides think they have the right answer and 2 sides are disagreeing about a particular viewpoint. And it's up to a judge to make that call. And I've had final exam questions where students have got all the right laws, they've applied it in a different way than how I've seen it, but they've applied it with logic and they've still ended up with full marks. And there are a couple of questions this semester in the tutes that will hopefully lead you in that direction and get a little bit of debate going in the tutorials. So don't think that there's always a hard and fast answer. Sometimes there is. Sometimes there's a particular way of looking at it and there's not much else you can do. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 different interpretations that you could have, and that's what you'll learn throughout the semester. Law and politics, as I said, politics influences the law because it's politicians and Parliament who make legislation. And that political process and the legislation is what we'll look at next week in addition to the court systems. This is really important, and usually there's a question on this sort of thing in the mid-semester exam. We're the second of those. So Australia is seen as a common law country, and it's something in particular that we'll focus on next week. Civil law, many of the Asian countries, China, the non-British background countries, so the non-UK background imperial countries, are in a civil law system. And what that means is almost everything is legislative. It's all done in documents and legislation, and the law is all in legislation passed by the government, passed by the political parties. In Australia, we're in a common law system. And a common law system means that we have this large body of legal thinking in our case law. And we have judges and courts, and if you go to court, they pass a judgment, and that judgment becomes part of our legal system. And we'll learn all about this next week, but this is critical for you this semester, because we look at a whole lot of cases and a whole lot of things that have happened, and every one of those things and every one of those cases are part of our bigger legal system, and that's judge-made law. So the difference between common law and civil law, common law has that case law component, and that's what you have to remember. Australia is not a civil law system. Australia is a common law system. Some examples of the systems. So Japan, China, Thailand, Indonesia are all civil law systems. You can put a little note there to yourself. Another name for civil law system is Roman law. So civil law is also known as Roman law. Why? Because the original idea of legislative-based law came from Roman times, came from Italy and came from that structure. So that's another example of a civil law system. And you'll see here all of these common law countries, they're all countries that have the English UK heritage, imperial heritage. Almost finished. So, origins of the Australian legal system. Tens of thousands of years prior to the British coming here. Some of you who would have studied Australian history at school will know this. But tens of thousands of years prior to British settlement, we had that Indigenous system. So it was our native Australian system. It was customary, it was built on dream time is the principle that they built it on. So they had a whole range of thinking about the law that's very different to what we know currently. From first settlement, so the English came here, the big thing that you have to remember is that term. So Australia was declared terra nullius. Anyone from school or history remember what that means? Pardon? Yeah, there's no one here. You can think of it as the traditional way of thinking of it is land belonging to no one. So when they came here, they pretty much said, this country belongs to nobody. It's free to claim, and we can just claim it as a British land. And they did that. So what they did was they did not recognise our Indigenous people, the Aboriginal people. And that's how Australia was first formed. So Australia was deemed to have been settled by the British rather than conquered. No one here, the British settle. The British don't have to conquer the people that were already in the country. British settlers brought with them British law, hence why we are a common law country, because our legal traditions, our legal history come from Great Britain, come from the UK. And that's according to the doctrine of reception. So terra nullius, doctrine of reception, both of those terms have been terms I have examined in the mid-semester exam previously. New South Wales colony and others were initially controlled by a British government. And what happened was the different parts in Australia, like Brisbane, New South Wales, Sydney, Melbourne, different areas in Australia were all separate. They all kind of had their own laws. They developed their own system of doing things under the big banner of the UK system. But there was no uniformity. And then we federated. So it was this system where in the end the states got together, and anyone who knows the Australian states, they're divided like that on the little diagram. States got together and said, instead of being all separate and having no uniformity, let's get together and have one single system. And we can each still have our own state rules, but it's under the Federation of Australia. So we're one unified country instead of many individual little states. Came into existence on the 1st of January 1901. Exceptionally important date, obviously, because federation dictates a lot of what we've done. And the other thing I want you to note down there, everyone should write this, Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act. So the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act, 1900, in brackets, UK, close brackets. So Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act, 1900, bracket, UK, close bracket. That's the piece of legislation that made it all happen. That's the piece of legislation that federated us and is our constitution. I ask this all the time, and it'll be one of your questions in the first tutorial. And the amount of students who get it wrong is high because there can be some very subtle little differences, but you are all warned it will be in there. Why is it 1900? Because if we came into existence on the 1st of January 1901, it can't have been in 1901 that it was passed. It had to be the previous year that the Act was passed to allow us to federate on 1st of January 1901. And because we were a British UK-based system, it had to be the Parliament in Britain who made the Act. So it is not in brackets Commonwealth, it is in brackets UK, because the UK has to have allowed Australia to federate. That's the process of it happening. So 1900, UK Parliament says, yes, 1st of January 1901, Australia can become their own federal system. That's how it works. So you can have all sorts of little differences there in your question. It meant that we had a central government, and it meant as part of that central government we then had the states. And Australia now looks like that, with an overall federal system and different state systems under that, but it is unified. And one of the tutorial questions which you should think of is federation a good thing and why? So, is federation good? Well, of course it is, because unification means money, defence, trade, all of those things are unified, and you have one system instead of many, which is a lot more confusing. Example question. Which of the following was the result of federation in Australia? A. Union of the states and the Commonwealth for political and economic reasons. Well, yes, that's true. B. Creation of federal and state governments that each had and shared different powers. Yes, you had states that shared powers and the federal government that had its own powers. And C. The transformation of the Crown colonies into states. In other words, the Crown UK colonies individually were transformed into states that was part of the federal structure. So that is an example where it is D, all of the above. All three of those are relevant to that question and are correct. So that is an example where you can have an all of the above or none of the above. We learn about this in a lot more detail next week, so I won't dwell on this, but just be aware, our government, to provide checks and balances and be fair, is in three sort of sections. Legislature, which is the Parliament, so you should note that little bit down so you can get this into your brains, because you always get a question on this. So the legislature is the Parliament, it's the politicians, they make law. So they're the ones that pass and make the law. The executive, a separate lot of people, administer the law. That's the government in charge. So not all politicians, but the government in power who we vote in, and they administer it. Part of that are police, as an example. If you break the law and you speed, you might get a traffic ticket. That is law already being made and the police enforcing it or administering it. And then your third arm is the judiciary. If you don't think it's been administered in the right way, or you think someone's done wrong by you, you can then challenge the law. And what that means is you go to court, the judiciary, and they interpret the law according to your case. We call this the separation of powers. And what it means is no one arm, no one thing, or no one body does everything. And in dictatorships where you have corruption, one body does all. They make the law, they enforce the law, they interpret the law. You have no rights, really, as a person. Here, different people do different things, so it's all evenly distributed, and you can't have corruption. And that's basically what the separation of powers is. And that's kind of an overarching thing that we'll look at next week when we look at court structures in different areas. There are different concepts there, and the reason why I put this up, this is something you should absolutely note. As an example, we don't look at what a constitutional monarchy is. However, in the textbook, there are 3 or 4 pages on it. Now, this is where I said to you at the beginning, you can have questions in your mid-semester exam that we haven't covered directly here, but that are in your textbook. And these concepts in the circles are examples of that. You should know what each of those are. Some of them we cover, some of them we don't. And there could be mid-sem questions on that. Just before you go, I'm going to define this one for you. So write it down, because it's a better definition than what you might find in your text. So liberal democracy. Democratic system of government. So a democratic system of government. A democratic system of government in which individual rights, so a democratic system of government in which individual rights and freedoms, so in which individual rights and freedoms are officially recognised, so are officially recognised and protected, and then one more line, and the exercise of political power is limited by the rule of law. So, and the exercise of political power is limited by the rule of law. So a democratic system of government in which individual rights and freedoms are officially recognised and protected, and the exercise of political power is limited by the rule of law. So it kind of ties in a lot of the different things that we've looked at in the second half of this lecture. And a really basic type of question that I'll end on, again, these are kind of the first questions in the mid-semester exam. They're shorter, easier to do. Which of the following describes a feature of the Australian system of government? An Australian republican democracy. Well, in Australia, our system is a constitutional monarchy, not a republican system. So not like the American system. So A is not correct. A constitutional monarchy, B is correct. A British parliamentary democracy is not correct, because we're not part of the British system directly anymore. Civil law system, you know, is not correct, because we're a common law system, as we talked about just then. And none of the above obviously isn't correct either, because B is the correct answer. It's the type of question where you need to have read the book to understand the general concepts to be able to answer that. Not a particularly hard question, but you still have to have done further reading from just what's been here. So that's kind of how I see that one. Okay, see you next week. And don't forget, if you want, come and have a look at the notes during this week. Would be a good idea. How are you?
When you said that for the mid-semester, like the textbook was fair game, that just means like the parts of the textbook that we would have gotten up to, right? Not the entire thing, just like chapters 1 and 2.
So basically it's up to chapter 4. But yeah, everything after chapter 4 is resolving deadlocks, yep. Everything up to chapter 4. Yes, that's the end of it. Chapter 5 starts torts, which is week 3. So anything before chapter 5 is basically what you need to study for your exams. Okay. Yep. No. No, you don't have to go into that detail. Okay, see ya. Okay. You can log off. Yeah. Sorry, hold on 2 seconds.